Hello, this is Dr. Berengrutter. In this video tutorial, I'm going to go over a process that I have been working on and using of late to generate occlusal guards on my own and then 3D print them in Office. So with this approach, we're going to be using two different softwares. The first software is going to be BlueSkyPlan, which is a free software to download from BlueSkyBio. You can go to BlueSkyBio.Academy to find this software. It has a lot of great features. Its initial primary focus was implant planning, and now has branched out into ortho aligners and some other uses as well. So we're going to be using this software in the very first part of the tutorial, and then we will be moving on to Meshmixer, which is a free CAD software that is not dental specific. It can kind of do just about anything with it, and it's very user friendly. It's put out by Autodesk, and Autodesk has a great deal of different softwares with more and more functionality as they get into the more advanced softwares, and this is a free one to use. So we're going to go ahead and start the process. One thing I do want to mention is that BlueSkyPlan is a free software. However, when you export the file is when you do pay a fee. Essentially, you buy a package of exports, and so when you generated the file you want to use, when you export it, you're going to be using one of your coupons, if you will, or as we call them, licenses, and that can vary anywhere from about $10 or $15 to $20, depending on how many you buy at a time. So when I'm actually done designing this occlusal guard, I will print it using SprintRay's MoonRay printer. They have two different models of their MoonRay 3D printers. One is the S, which is their standard one, and then D for dental. And the S is just slightly larger. It's slightly less detail. It's 100 micron XY axis detail, and then the D is 75 microns. And their software is downloadable on their website, and I will kind of go over that towards the end of the video as I actually build the build platform with the occlusal guard on it. And lastly, Nextent, I should have added this ahead of time. Nextent resin is the resin I will be using. They have a variety of resins ready for dental use, and the one that I use is the Ortho Clear, and the MoonRay Rayware software that MoonRay uses has a profile built into it. Basically, profile being how the printer makes this specific resin work. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started on this process. The very first thing we're going to do is, I've already opened the software, but you'll see right here I've got a folder with some files in it, an upper arch, a lower arch, even a bite relation. We're not going to be using the bite relation, but I like to have it in case things get lost or in the mix. So ignore that file. Most of the time we don't need that, but I do have it with all my cases. So first software we're going to be using is BlueSkyPlan. So I've actually got to get that opened up for us just to save us the load time. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, which we already have. It is not a current do is we're going to bring in the upper arch. Since we're going to be making our guard on the upper, we're just going to bring this in by dragging and dropping it in the software. You can drag it in just about anywhere, and we're going to go ahead and hit the cancel button on the alignment. We don't want to move it. We're just going to leave it where it is. If I zoom out of here in this 3D view, I can go ahead and move this around and kind of get an idea of where I'm at. So the first thing we're going to do with the BlueSkyPlan software is to create sort of the beginnings of our surgical guide. It's going to be just sort of the part that wraps around the teeth, and then the occlusal portion will be added to that in Meshmixer. So the first thing we've got is we've got our model in here, and now we're going to come over to the guide panel. And if you see, we've got all these little panels listed here. Now, if you're new to the software, you won't have all these listed. Up here on the top left, there's a button called Panels, and you can find the different panels I'm talking about, such as the Guide Fabrication panel. I have it open already, so it pops up over here. There's various panels. I can close out of them, and if I ever need to find that one again, which was the nerve panel, I can go ahead and open it up. So anyway, we're not using that right now. All we're going to be using is the guide panel. Right now at the top, I have the upper arch listed. It will default there if you only have one model. If you have multiple models for whatever reason, make sure you've got the right one selected. One of the things that's important we're going to be doing here is we're going to be making it, rather than the standard 3mm thick surgical guide, we're going to be creating a 1mm thick guide. So I've just changed that little parameter. Another thing is, if you come up to the Tools menu and you come down to Preferences, right here under the defaults is going to be surgical guide offset. The software's default is 0.20 millimeters, and that is essentially the space between the surgical guide and the model, so that there's a passive fit. We don't want it to be identical because it would be so tight you would never get it on. And we're going to work with 2.20. That's what we want. We want the software's default. But if you've been using the software and you find that you've had to change that for whatever reason based on your printer or whatnot, make sure for this, if you're going to follow this tutorial, that you have this set at 0.20. You may choose to change that based on your own preferences, but that's where I'm working from. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a surgical guide. Now, normally we would have an implant plan, then various parts that would be highlighted, but we're gonna pretend that's all there. It doesn't really matter for this. So right now we're gonna go ahead and hit Draw Curve, and to do so, we're gonna hold the Shift button. If you notice, when I press the Shift button, it turns my arrow into a crosshair, and I'm gonna draw my line at the level of where I want the guard to extend. I like to go just about the height of contour. On the second molar, since they're so flared out, I don't really want to wrap around there too much, just because it gets a little bit high and a little more tight, or flared out depending on the undercut settings. I'll go back to that in just a moment. Let me finish drawing this curve. I like to stay at about the level of the cingulum and the anterior. Depending on the patient's bite, that might vary. If they have a very, very extreme overjet, you may have to go even farther back, but for the most part, the cingulum is going to be a good place to stop. These lines will automatically connect. You do not have to bring them all the way across if you don't want. When I click on the Edit Curve, you'll see that it knows it needs to have a closed loop, if you will. So I can move these little nodes to where I want them to kind of clear up the line. I drew that, and you can draw it pretty quickly. The quicker you draw it, the better. Sometimes if you draw it really slowly, you'll get a ton of these little nodes, and it just takes a long time to get them all evened out. So I recommend drawing it pretty quickly. If you get some errors, no big deal, because you're going to come back to this step and edit them anyway. So I like to go a little bit deeper on the lingual. Since path of draw is not going to matter on the lingual, I like to really get down there close to the gingiva. That way we don't have to worry about the tongue feeling a large lip or transition that will irritate the tongue as much. I mean, this is going to cause a little bit of issues. It always does, where it's something foreign in someone's mouth. They're not going to love it, but we want to try and optimize that as much as possible. Alright, I think we're probably pretty good at this point. I'll get this a little bit closer around here. And alright, looks pretty even to me. Okay, so one other thing that I mentioned, but I want to clarify, is that on the settings, the little gear up here, the default in the software is to remove the undercuts. We're going to leave that. We want it to remove the undercuts because we need to get this in and out. If you include the undercuts, you can sometimes get it to work, but if there's any teeth that are truly flared, you're really going to have trouble getting it in and out. There are times when they're so flared that you want to uncheck this and then manually remove them so that you don't have big gaps. But for now, for this tutorial, I'm just going to leave that alone for now and do my default, which is to remove the undercuts. Alright, so if I go ahead and click Create Surgical Guide, and it's going to ask me, well, there's no implants or no drill kit, whatever, do you want to continue? Yes, I do. and just go ahead and hit save here. Don't worry about that. That's all for the surgical guide software. Okay, so now we have our the beginning of our guard. You can see that it's a nice mesh that overlays the teeth right where we wanted it to. Patient should be able to wear this without too much trouble. If I go back up to the surfaces panel, I can uncheck the upper model checkbox and essentially set it to invisible. And here it is. So maybe a little thin in the anterior here, but that really shouldn't matter. If you want to increase that thickness, you can. I would not do it here. You can do that in Meshmixer fairly quickly and easily, but for now we are pretty good to go. And yeah, this is the extent of the BlueSkyPlan software used for this. Gives us a starting point. Okay, so but how do we get this guard, if you will, out of the software? Well, we're going to come up to the file, export data, and make sure that this is checked. But actually, I'm going to go ahead and check both of them, and then I'm going to hit export. That number down here, that 43.5, is the number of exports. And I'm going to export it to the same folder. I'm going to call it upper guard mesh. I'm going to say -with model just so I know it's in there. Hit save. And so now we are effectively done with this software. I'm just going to hide it for now just in case we need to get back at it. So if I go ahead now in this folder, you can now see the upper guard mesh with model file that I just created. So if I click on this to open it up, it's actually going to open it up in that Meshmixer software that I discussed earlier. Okay, so here is that file. I'm going to go ahead and bring in the lower arch. I'm just going to drag and drop it. The software is going to ask me if I want to replace it or append. Append just means add it to what we're working on, or replace means get rid of everything else. We don't want to replace everything, we just want to add this in here. Okay, and so now you can see we have our models in occlusion with our guard on there. So now we just need to make sure that we actually, the patient's going to bite in this setup. Now, I'm going to show you something. First, we're going to go ahead and separate out this guard. I'm going to hit the select button here, and then I'm going to first make sure that the upper model, this one is white, which means it's the active one. You can see over here in our object browser, I'm going to maximize this window so we can really see. So the one that is highlighted is the active model, or the white one, light gray, whatever. If I hit the select button and I highlight over the model, or highlight over the model or the guard, you can see how the little circle drops back and forth. So I'm going to hover over top of the guard, and I'm going to double click on it and keep my mouse still. The whole thing gets highlighted. Now I can go ahead up to edit, separate, or just press the Y button, which is a shortcut. That is going to separate it out. So now if I'm going to rename this, I'm going to call this guard, and I'm going to rename this one upper model, and just for sake of consistency, lower model. And so now you can see we've got the upper model, the lower model, and the guard. 3 different meshes that we're going to be working with. Okay? So I'm a bit of a worrywart. I like to make sure things are saved, I don't lose things. So I'm going to go ahead and save this right now. Control S, and guard workup. So now I can get back to that if I need to. Okay, so although we've saved our work here, there's also another step I like to take just to make sure everything is going to be backed up. Is I like to highlight by pressing Shift and click the top model, or vice versa, and then click right here, which is the duplicate button, or up here you can see it's the same thing. Press this and wait. It takes a second, but what we're doing is it's going to create a whole separate copy. Now, once in a while, it'll somehow create 2 copies. I'm just giving you a heads up. Not a big deal. Just click delete, and it'll delete the most recent set. So, anyway, so now we have the copies, And I'm going to go ahead and set the originals to invisible. And so we've got these three. Now all of our work is going to commence on these, and that way we don't have to worry about accidentally. If we ever do something we don't want to do, we can delete it and recopy it over if we need to. Hopefully that won't happen, but once again, it's just nice to have a backup set. So let me talk a little bit about these models for a second and how we got them and what they why they look the way they do. So first of all, as you can tell, the bite is open. And this is probably one of the most, it is the most important step in my opinion. First of all, these are just alginate impressions and stone models. You can see they're not the greatest models, but they certainly will work for this, particularly this little bleb on the lower. It's not going to matter because the guide's going to be on the top with occlusion off the bottom. So anyway, that's not going to matter, but what's important is that it's open, and how is it open? That's going to be up to you and what your protocol is on how to obtain the open bite. In our office, we like to use a leaf gauge to deprogram the patient, try to get them in a comfortable centric relation position, and record the bite there. And so when we generate our models and generate the bite, it is all based in that position, because we're hoping to have this patient in CR throughout the night when they wear this guard. Again, that's all about protocols, and your own office protocols and what you're aiming for. But just remember, what we don't want to do is hypothetically, let's say I'm going to push a couple buttons, I'm going to hit transform just to close this. We don't want to end up with this and then just import our models in occlusion and then arbitrarily move it into where we think the open bite is, because as we know, it is not a direct vertical. And guessing this, you will guess wrong. You will try in your guard and it will not fit right, or the occlusion will not fit. Will not be right, I should say. It's sort of like sending your lab some stone models and with a closed bite and asking them to make a guard in CR without giving them the bite in CR. Now they have a little better chance because they're using articulator, which should be working off some averages, but still, you're still going to have it either touched in the anterior or the posterior first, most likely. So getting the bite in CR is just going to make everything a lot easier, in my opinion. So I'm going to hit escape just to kind of get out of that mode. So now what we need to do is we need to create this guard so that it occludes appropriately. As you can see right now, if I click on the guard so that it's highlighted and I look from underneath, I can see it poking through on the second and first molars and on both sides. But nowhere in the premolars, of course not in the anterior. So it's good. You could make this guard as is and then wait for the patient to come in and grind in the occlusion, and that would work. It'd be fine. But you would only have the occlusion back here unless you ground through it even more until they started to hit, and then you're going to be getting really thin. I mean, remember, this is only 1 millimeter thick, and we already have these points. So you can only grind so much. So and look how open they are. Although we did 1 millimeter thick, it's really not that much thickness back here, and then it's way open here. So I wouldn't feel comfortable opening the patient even more than this. So we're going to work with this, and I'm going to show you kind of how. First of all, when we put the bite in, there's a machine called the Ercoform, which is Glidewell's suck down machine, which has basically an articulator built into it. So you can make your suck down with your guard material on the upper model, and then essentially slam the lower model down into it, which makes little indents into it so you can capture that CR. And that's great, it works. The only problem with it is it leaves pointed indents for the cusps and doesn't really leave anywhere for them to move. So if they do need to move, you've got to do a lot of grinding to get that smooth. So we're going to try to avoid that. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to try to create a little more room for a little more pathway for movement in this guard. And so we're going to hide this model, and we're going to work on the lower first, basically what those occlusal marks in the upper are going to look like. To do this, we're going to effectively fill in the occlusal surfaces, the grooves of these teeth. Now, I do want to show you one thing. We're going to ignore the first premolars on this case because the guard is going to be really hard to get this into occlusion. Possibly the cusp tip, but that's about it. And then this first premolar, very difficult based on the fact that it's a class 2 bite on this side. So giving you a heads up why I'm going to be approaching it the way I do, and I think you'll see what I mean in a moment. So I'm going to hide the guard again. And so how am I going to fill in those? Now you could actually take flowable composite in the lab before you scan this model, or wax or whatever, and just fill those in. That would be a quick and easy way, something that you could delegate really easily, and that would work. But if you want to have a backup set of models that are accurate and do this all digitally, this is how I like to do it. So first of all, we're going to use the select button again. And you see how it starts off with this big area. That's the affected area. Well, that's too much. We're not looking to do that. So instead, I'm going to hit Escape, hit S again, kind of start over. And you can slide this little bar left and right to get it bigger or smaller, or you can use your bracket buttons to make it bigger or smaller. And this is, there is no right number. It's just about what you feel works. This is going to work pretty well in this. And I'm going to highlight inside the cusp tips. It might lap over them just a touch, but I'm not really trying to. I'm trying to stay right inside of them. Fill that, and then come right over here to the next tooth, bridging that gap just slightly across the marginal ridges. And here we go. All right. So that one's done. We're going to come over to this side and do the exact same thing. Highlight from cusp tip to cusp tip. This is probably the most tedious step of the process, but it really doesn't take much more than a minute or two. With practice, it gets very quick. Once again, something to delegate, I would recommend. Most of this entire process can and probably should be delegated. All right, so we've highlighted. We're just going to do this process in the posterior. So we've got those highlighted. We're going to fill in those areas. So we're going to hit the erase and fill, or just the F button to do this, and it's going to run some calculations. Give it a second to think, and once it does, you will see them to be sort of flattened. Don't worry about this little pink area. We're going to fix that in a minute. So the software doesn't know how much should it fill it in with positive error or negative. So I'll tell you what I tend to do. I tend to go about halfway through here between the scale on this little slider bar right here. And if it's still, now that it's somewhat negative, you can see it on both sides. It's a little bit negative. I don't want negative space. I'm going to go to bulge, and I'm going to come right above here and click. And it's around 4. I found that 3 to 5 is where I'm usually looking to be. That's 5, and I think that the 4 was actually better. And that's just a matter of how much this sticks out. Is it negative, positive, or what? So I'm not changing this number. I was just getting off of it so that it would affect the change. Okay, so now we're looking pretty good. That's the change that I wanted to make. Now, one other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to hit accept. This has all been, I basically accepted those changes. I've left them as is. And now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use my highlight button, my select, which I'm still selecting, and I'm going to over select it just a little bit. Not much. I'm just going to kind of surround this so that I get right on the opposite sides of the cusp tips. Not much. We do not want to get on much of the down slope. But this is going to make it so the indents are slightly negative, slightly indented into the guard to help the patient know where their bite should be, but not so much that they're trapped. We're not trying to trap them. We're trying to help them to find where home is, but also be able to get out of it easily, if that makes sense. Couple little click marks. Again, don't worry about that gray bleb. I'm going to hit Control Z because I got a little bit overzealous with that click. Control Z is the same thing as undo. If you're not familiar with that shortcut, I would hope that you could remember that, because that's going to be for just about any Windows-based software. That's a very useful tool to be aware of. Another reason why I like to do multiple clicks, because if I just drag this and I need to undo a small part of it, it's going to undo everything. Sometimes it's okay. Dragging is certainly faster, but if you're just not sure and you're afraid you're going to kind of fall off and accidentally go a little too much, I wouldn't drag a lot, maybe once per area. So now I've got those areas all highlighted. I'm going to, remember the Y button I pressed earlier, separate, because I'm going to separate this out. I want these to actually be separate from the arch. If you look, now here they are. They're just floating in here. So you see this little area right here. If I come over to the Sculpt tool, and I come over to my brushes and hit Robust Smooth. Now I don't want it too strong. 43 is pretty decent. Size, whatever size you want this to be. And I just kind of smooth it out. There's a little errors, little holes in it. And so that's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to do much because I don't want to really change the anatomy there. I just don't like the software to see little bugs or bugs in the surface or errors, flaws. So that's all I've done there. And that's it. So hit the escape button and I'm out of any sort of edit mode. Now I can go ahead and turn this back on because I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to come out here and I'm going to, I want this guard to have a flat plane occlusion. Right now there's a big space, so I want to have some anterior disclusion. So to do so, I'm going to hide that. I don't want, I'll just show you what I want to do. So I'm going to select, and this size can be smaller if necessary. It doesn't really matter. We're going to stay to the lingual. We do not want to cover overlap to the facial of these teeth. You can go as deep as you want in the lingual. I don't go real deep. I try to stay just at the incisal edge, but it's not going to matter if you go a little bit deep. At least not if they have an overjet like this patient. We want to get the incisal edge and just slightly over top to the lingual aspect. Now, one thing I had meant to say at the beginning of this video is the process I'm showing you in this video, I don't even know how long this has taken, but I suspect this is going to be a 30-minute video. This process takes me about 10 to 12 minutes to design. Teaching someone or making a video on it is always going to be a much longer process, but I don't want that to worry you too much. So now I've highlighted them. Once again, I'm going to press the Y button to separate them out, and so we can get rid of that model. So right now we've got this and we've got these. So we actually want these to be one solid model. So I'm just going to press the Shift button and click here, or Control, whichever. And now these are both selected. You can see they're both gray or whitish, and just hit Combine. So we now have, this model, which has those parts cut out. This is effectively useless at this point, because what we really want is this model. If you want them all to look gray, which does not matter, but if you just hit Control A or highlight all, you can just come down to Modify and Clear Face Groups. That just makes them all gray. Now you can really identify that they're all the same model. That doesn't affect anything for what we're doing, but as far as visual goes, just want to let you know you can do that. So that is the extent of the work in the lower model. And so here's where the work comes into getting the guide and occlusion. We're going to use this little guy right here, which looks like a magnet or target. We're going to set this as the target. If I click on this, it makes it sort of transparent and makes it blue. I can now turn on my guard. And before I do this, just to be smart, what's the one thing we should be doing? We should be saving. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. This is not a crash-friendly process at all. I mean, a crash-heavy process. I don't remember ever crashing on it, but just to be safe, I would go ahead and save. One little step that you don't have to do, I actually never do it. I have never done it up until now, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and shave off these little areas. I'm not going to because it doesn't matter, but you could go ahead and select these and cut those areas out, but they're not going to matter. Okay, so let's turn on the guard. Make sure it's selected. We're going to turn on that little Attract To button. And so now we're going to bring the guard into occlusion into those parts. So to do so, we are currently selected on the guard. and we're going to come to the sculpt tool. There's one tool we're looking for, and it's the one that also has the magnet. So we're going to hit attract. Now, I pumped this strength up to 100 because I wanted an exact match here. So you can't go too strong, and I'll show you why, what that looks like in a second. The size is up to you. I'm going to go a little larger because I don't want to waste too much time. I'm going to dial this up, and we're going to go ahead and I'm going to click the button, and you can see what happens is it brings that guard so that it's in occlusion. Now, one thing I want to point out is you see how it's pink? Well, let's look underneath what's happened. Whoa, it's actually affecting the integrity of the guard. Don't want that. Why is it doing that? Because this checkbox, volumetric, it's adjusting the entire guard, not just the surface that we're thinking we're working on. So I'm going to hit Control-Z, and now I'm going to uncheck that box. I do not want to mess with that box. So now I can do whatever I like here, and let's see what's happening on the underside. Nothing. It's staying completely intact. I'm going to drag across and keep going. So now I know that those surfaces are all going to have occlusion in these areas. Okay? Now, it may extend out a little bit. You may want it to be a little more fluid, and that's fine. If you want it to transition a little more smoothly, you can come out here so that it sort of has a gradual slope to meet those surfaces. This is not imperative. It's not going to affect the actual device, but if you think it's going to be more comfortable, then that's fine. You can do that. All right, so that side's done. This side. Again, we can go pretty quickly with this. And that's why I said this whole process generally doesn't take me a whole lot of time, because generating the initial mesh is about a 2-minute process. Selecting out those areas is maybe 2 minutes, and then this part shouldn't be much longer, 5 minutes on this process. This is where it isn't hard at all, but there is a little bit of a process to this. We've got both the posterior areas. I guess I can go ahead and blend it in a little bit more right here by going a little bit outside of the area so that it transitions, makes it a little more comfortable for the patient potentially. I don't think so because they're probably going to be resting on it, but anyway, if you want to. Now we're going to go ahead and get the anterior area. Little tip here, if you this view I have limits me to how much movement I can have. I actually like that, but if you want to get a little more freedom of movement, press and hold the shift or the space button, click here on free, and then let go. Now you can move it around as much as you like. Again, that sometimes I like to do that, but in this I like to leave it locked. But that just depends on what kind of thing I'm doing. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build up this ramp so it comes from here up to these teeth. And to do that, I'm just going to walk around right through here on the inside. And you can see that now, once I'm done with this, I've got a guard that essentially has occlusion, just barely, but it does a little indent. I don't want the indent, so now I'm going to fill that in by walking right through here. And gradually getting farther and farther out. When I do it, I tend to just do the whole thing, not just to the midline, but I want to give you a side-by-side comparison, so bear with me for just a second. Alright, and that's pretty good. Let's go take a look at what this looks like. So now you can see you've got sort of a plane occlusion where these teeth are going to touch, and as they try to protrude, they're going to slide right along this. You'll have to adjust this in the mouth if you want to get it really refined down, but it should definitely give you a very good place to start. So we'll do that right quick on this side as well. I'm going to make my little affected area a little larger so it'll be even quicker. Yeah, you can see how much faster that moves. We're going right out to the cusp tips, if you can tell. That should be enough to make a nice gradual anterior ramp. And that's it. So our guard is effectively done at this point. And I want to show you a couple of things that you might notice and you might wonder about. I'm going to smooth this a little. I'm going to do this a little more right here. Okay, so let's turn off the magnet. Let's even hide these. Oh, actually, if I turn this on, you can see the little speckling, which shows you that these teeth area, whatever surfaces are in perfect match with this guard, which just tells you kind of how they're going to line up. If you lap over to the facial a little more of these teeth, you'll end up with occlusion on them and possibly a little bit of a stop. I don't like that, but that's, again, a user preference. So I'm going to turn this off and look at our guard. Here is our guard. Now there's a couple of sharp points here, here possibly, but I used to, when I first started doing this, I spent some time trying to smooth these out, but as you smooth it out, it then affects the occlusion, so you redo it, and you go back and forth. The reality is, with anyone that's used to 3D printing, you're going to have to make some supports to print this. And when you remove the supports, you're going to smooth that off. So I feel it makes more sense to go ahead and print as is. When you remove the supports, most of the supports are going to end up on these high pointed areas anyways. So when you remove and smooth off the supports, you're going to be smoothing those areas down. So save yourself the time. Go ahead and design this 10-minute occlusal guard and export it to your printing software. Make your supports, print it, remove it, smooth it, you're done. And that is about it. So one last thing is, well, we've got our guard made. I'm going to hit Control S to save this. Well, and actually, there's a little tip. If you look, you see my little red dot, how it's going back and forth on both sides of the screen, and there's this white line. Because I'm in an active tool and I hit Control S, the only thing it did was activate this symmetry tool, which basically means anything that happens on one side of the line happens on the other. We didn't want that, but I want you to know that that happened because I don't want you to get confused why things are getting all out of whack. If I hit Control S again, watch this uncheck. There you go. If I hit Escape to exit out of the active tool, now I can hit Control S, as we know, to save, or just click on there if you want to be safe. So anyway, we've saved it, but we still need to export this guard, just like kind of similar to how we did in BlueSkyPlan. We're going to come down here to export or hit Control E. And we are already in the appropriate folder, so I'm going to just call it guard final, just the way I name things, and hit save. And so I can go ahead and exit out of here. And now I am free to open it up in any printing software I have. I'll show you real quickly. I think I probably just opened this about 10 times. Yep, I did. Well, 4 times. I can then take the guard final, drop it in here. Center it. Change the degree, change the angulation. I gotta think about this for a second here. Yep, there we go. Or maybe actually I want to go, let's see, 240, will that be right? Let me think. No, let's 300. I'll get it once, eventually. There we go. 120 degrees. That keeps all the walls sort of vertical. And now I can go ahead and click my supports, generate supports. And so there's my guard. All right. That's about it. Now you could fairly easily fit 2 guards in here, one here and another. In fact, just to give you a little idea, sorry, and duplicate. Let's go ahead and we'll just rotate this, and there you go. Alright, so now we've got 2 guards ready to print. We are all good. Alright, I hope this video helps. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, or you can always get me a message sent. Alright.